Where exactly was Wildwood Amusement Park? That's one of the questions we receive most frequently at the White Bear Lake Area Historical Society. So we decided it was time to try to answer that a few years back. Here's what we learned. Several places in our area have been known by the name Wildwood Park. The peninsula in White Bear Lake was originally platted with the name Wildwood Park when the area was platted for development. The city of Willarney was originally called Wildwood, but later changed its name to Willarney as there was another Wildwood already in the state of Minnesota. Wildwood Amusement Park was officially born as Wildwood Park on the southernmost point of the White Bear Lake, straddling the border of what is present-day Matamidi and Birchwood, and wrapping around the southwestern and southeasternmost points of that bay of the lake. Most believe that Wildwood was developed by the Twin City Rapid Transit Company, who operated the streetcar system across the metro area, which is partially true. Wildwood existed as a very rustic place as early as the 1880s. During that time, it functioned mainly as a picnic ground and gathering space. By the time this ad appeared in the Lake Breeze, White Bear's newspaper, in 1893, amusements were being added. The area on the east shore of the lake was platted in 1883 by the Matamidi Chautauqua Association and was quickly popularized as a summer resort community for those seeking moral entertainments. The nearby Matamidi Hotel, located on Quail Street overlooking the lake, and the Chautauqua Assembly Grounds provided visitors to the picnic grounds, and originally that's all there was at Wildwood. In September of 1889, both Minneapolis Street Railway and the St. Paul City Railway were given permission by the respective city councils to install experimental electric lines. The precursor to the Twin City Rapid Transit was the St. Paul and White Bear Railroad, which was previously the North St. Paul Railway. In March of 1892, the North St. Paul Railway reorganized as the St. Paul and White Bear Railroad and immediately began making improvements to their line, which included an extension from North St. Paul to Matamidi and electrification of the entire operation. At the same time, the St. Paul and White Bear Railroad purchased 5 acres of land from the Wildwood Park Company, previously organized from the Wildwood Park Association, and quickly built a bathhouse, carousel, bowling alley, and laundry. The idea behind the park was to have an attraction to draw ridership to the end of the line. In 1892, Frank Trumbull of Denver was brought in by the cities to inspect the TCRT company lines. His summary stated that he considered this property the finest he had yet examined. In his opinion, it was the best at present of its kind in the West. On July 1, 1892, service began with daily trips running from St. Paul to Matamidi, with stops at North St. Paul and Wildwood. This first attempt was so successful, it put the company into receivership, and the assets were sold at a sheriff's auction in Washington County. Emerson Peet and Arthur Perry purchased all of the holdings of the St. Paul and White Bear Railroad and partnered with Frank B. Kellogg, C.W.G. Withy, C.A. Severance, and Ambrose Teague, forming the St. Paul and Suburban Railroad. The St. Paul and Suburban Railroad Company began the practice of renting out booth or amusement space at their park, which is common today. The railroad company did operate the pavilion and some of the concessions, but appeared to stay away from most of the amusements. TCRT officials reported taking charge of Wildwood on June 24, 1898, and at the stockholders meeting on July 12, 1898, all existing stockholders and directors resigned effective June 30th. New officers were elected, including Kelvin Goodrich and Thomas Lowry. Offices were moved to the St. Paul City Railway office. Lowry owned large amounts of suburban real estate and was interested in bringing the outlying areas within easy traveling distance of the business district of the city, which would obviously benefit his efforts to market and sell his developments. In the fall of 1899, the property of the St. Paul and Suburban Railroad Company was sold for $1 to the Minneapolis and St. Paul Suburban Railway. This included the railroad aspects as well as the 5 acres composing the site of the park. Minneapolis and St. Paul Suburban was now wholly a subsidiary of TCRT. It was at this time that other land around the original park was purchased and the railway began their spur into Stillwater. The first run was on August 21, 1892. Thomas Lowry and his brother-in-law Kelvin Goodrich were instrumental in developing TCRT and the street rail system throughout the Twin Cities. Lowry is often credited for designing Wildwood Amusement Park. He was an active executive of the TCRT company at the time, but it is unclear how much direct involvement he had with the park's design. With the new line came increased power needs, so a steam-powered generator was completed in 1903. Once the new generator was completed, a line from Wildwood around the west shore of the lake was completed into downtown White Bear. That was completed in 1904, November of that year, and at the same time, $10,467 was spent for improvements at the park. All of the buildings were painted white, a new roller coaster was built, and a pier into the lake was added to provide access for the steamers that served as excursion boats and transportation all around the lake. In its early years, Wildwood Park had the reputation of being a tough resort. The hope was that the additions and sprucing up would help remedy that image. The White Bear Life, White Bear's newspaper, reported, "Since Wildwood, that beautiful resort at White Bear Lake, has passed under the management and control of the TCRT company, it is acquiring great popularity. The transit company has been generous in its improvements, which have included new bathhouses, additions to the pavilion, new walks, and above all, a new and complete stage for the large auditorium." While Wildwood was under the control of the TCRT during its operations, portions of the park and the equipment were held by various companies and subsidiaries, such as the Minnetonka and White Bear Navigational Company. Property transferred between the railroad companies and others fairly often over the years, depending on the financial state of each. The park was most often accessed by riders on the streetcar system or those on the steamers from the lake. In the early years of the park, steamers plied the waters of White Bear Lake. Visitors would arrive at the Lakeshore Depot near the present-day Kowalski's and White Bear Shopping Center and take the trip to Wildwood by using one of the steamers. J.D. Ramalley, an agent for the Minnetonka and White Bear Navigation Company, would provide round-trip transportation across the lake to Wildwood Park on board the Wildwood and the White Bear. Hourly boats ran from Lakeshore, the Ramalley's Pavilion, to Wildwood in the early 1900s, and a round-trip ticket cost 25 cents. By 1914, the steamer era on the lake was ending, and the White Bear had burned and sunk to the bottom of the lake, reputedly between Wildwood and the peninsula in the lake's deepest point, or near Boatworks Bay and the Ramalley Boat Company, where the Wildwood was put up for sale. The most popular way to arrive at the park was, of course, the streetcars. From St. Paul, one could take the streetcar to Wildwood for 10 or 15 cents in the early years of the last century, and the ride would last about 45 minutes. The electric trip from St. Paul to Wildwood is through rural scenes whose beauty is the delight of thousands who travel this highway. The line sweeps into Wildwood where one may find comfort, coolness, and kindred delights, according to St. Paul and the Vicinity by Henry Castle. The curves and twists of the streetcar were probably as exciting as the rides in some areas. Reportedly, the streetcars would hurtle down the tracks, reaching speeds of 60 miles per hour on a few sections. Once arriving at the park, the visitors would exit the streetcar on the raised platform and go down the twin staircases, where they could turn and go through a tunnel directly under the tracks between the stairs. This entrance was added almost immediately with the park improvements in 1900. The property was never fenced or bounded at its perimeter because there was no cost to enter, just to partake in the amusements. The marketing philosophy was that the people could enter the park for free, since many of them had paid the streetcar fare to get there. Over the years, many attractions came and went, but among the favorites were the roller coasters. The Dodgem roller coaster was the first at Wildwood and was replaced early on by the Pippin. The Pippin was constructed in 1904 by the Pierce Company, whose founder, Fred Pierce, later managed the entire park. The Pippin was a sight to behold. It was 500 feet long and was constructed of wood at a cost of $9,720 in 1904. During the off-season, between the 1908 and 1909 seasons, fire struck Wildwood. The October 16, 1908 issue of the White Bear Life featured a headline, "Wildwood Devastated, a good part of the popular resort destroyed by fire." After the fire, the Pippin was repaired at a cost more than half of its original construction price. The frame and several of the cars needed to be repaired or replaced altogether. The rebuilt Pippin was a 500-foot-long coaster that dominated the landscape. It was easily the most popular feature at the park, with an original cost of just 5 cents per ride. Eventually, the rates increased to 10 and then 15 cents. The Pippin was set back slightly from the shore of the lake, along where the turnoff to head into Birchwood is currently located. The Dodgem had been located slightly east of that spot and was replaced with the bumper cars, also known as scooters, and skee ball alley. Most of the attractions were located on the southwest end of the park property, while the more functional aspects were to the east. From west to east, wrapped around the southernmost point of the White Bear Lake, starting along the Birchwood side, would be the picnic grounds and the pavilion area. In the early years, the park really started as strictly the picnic area. It was quite rustic. The vast picnic groves were furnished with benches and tables where families could relax, eat, and enjoy the surroundings, while the children played at the playgrounds and swings around the area. You can see it was a pretty common place with a lot of activity happening. All along the shoreline, people could wade and have access while they wanted to eat and mingle and visit. And then, of course, the children had places to play and get some of their energy out. More modern kitchens for rent were added in later years, along with increasing concessions that carried a variety of refreshments, sandwiches, and ice cream cones. A free kitchen was available in the pavilion for preparing lunches and coffee. Then, as we move our way around the lake shore, closer to the shore was a big bathhouse designed originally by Cass Gilbert, architect of the Minnesota State Capitol, New York's Woolworth Building, the U.S. Supreme Court Building, and of course the White Bear Town Hall. The Grand Pavilion, located on the lake shore, is also said to have been designed by Cass Gilbert. Alongside the Victorian-style pavilion, baseball games were popular. Many of the early attractions in the park were destroyed in the 1908 fire. The blaze began in the kitchen of the pavilion building and spread. The pavilion, the funhouse, the Katzenjammer Castle, and the scenic railroad were destroyed, and the roller coaster was significantly damaged, along with the supply of new rowboats that had been stored in the pavilion for the winter. The wind caused the fire to be contained to the western side of the park, sparing the more functional buildings such as the dormitories, ice house, and manager's cottage, as well as the bowling alley. The estimated loss from the fire was $40,000, mostly covered by insurance, but not entirely. Immediately upon report of the fire, it was reported that the park would be rebuilt. After the fire, several of the attractions were rebuilt, including a new pavilion, which took on a much different appearance than the original Victorian-style building that served this purpose. The new pavilion was 90 feet by 180 feet and constructed of red brick with a tar and gravel roof. The interior boasted a hardwood dance floor that survived to the end of the park era. At the entrance to the dance hall was the main refreshment stand that sold soda fountain drinks, candy, ice cream, popcorn, and cigars. 10 cents got admission for the entire afternoon or evening dance session, each of which showcased 15 dances. This also included use of the check room. Dances were held Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays of each week. On Sundays, free concerts were given on the veranda. Well-known acts such as Fats Waller, Guy Lombardo, Cliff Perrine, Johnny Erickson's Land of the Lakes Orchestra all played at the park. Dave Dahl and his club orchestra were the headliners opening weekend in May of 1927. The park was generally open from Memorial Weekend through Labor Day and attracted an average of 1,000 visitors on the weekends and holidays and 400 to 500 throughout the weekdays. The park was open from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. daily, with the last streetcar leaving for St. Paul promptly at 11:30. Those cars were generally packed full of people, and it wasn't unusual to have some passengers turned away because they just couldn't fit anymore. Archie Newcomb was the floor walker, known as a dapper fellow with sparse white hair who wore a tuxedo and was a charmer. If couples danced too closely, he would tap them on the shoulder to make them separate. Of course, one of the consistent highlights throughout the years was the amazing swimming beach. Wildwood has always been known for having the finest beach in the area. The boathouse was typically loaded with more than 100 rowboats and other amenities on hand for those who wanted to venture out into the water. Tackle was provided at the 16 by 16 foot boathouse free of charge with a small fee for the bait. Boat rental was 25 cents per hour. Daily rates could be arranged. For those who preferred to stay near shore, the fully equipped bathhouse offered 200 rooms for the ladies to change into their swimwear. Suits could be rented for 25 cents, stockings for 10 cents, and caps for 15 cents. There were 500 lockers for men, along with 6 showers and suits for 25 cents. Small boys' suits were only 10 cents. If you brought your own suit, you could still rent a room and a towel for 25 cents. In addition to general swimming, the toboggan slide offered great amusement for those courageous enough to partake. The slide was one of the few attractions available for free. However, the management posted a sign warning the owner would not be responsible for nor guarantee its safety, nor the condition of the bed of the lake. Over the years, the toboggan slide changed slightly in its appearance, but it always remained a very popular attraction. The park was also often used by companies and schools for annual picnics. They would just buy out the park for the entire day. An advertisement for Wildwood boasted, "The best class of people were its patrons." It is a well-known fact that women and children can and do visit this resort without escort and in perfect safety. Beyond that, behind the bathhouse and pavilion buildings, set back from the water, were the attractions. In the early years of the park, the highlights included the Katzenjammer Castle, the Laughing Gallery, the Scenic Railroad, the Dodgem or Figure 8 roller coaster, and games of chance. In later years, the attractions became more elaborate and modern, with highlights such as the giant aeroplane, much like the spinning swings that swing around and fling riders out over the water, and of course the tilt-a-whirl. In 1926, Wildwood offered the very first tilt-a-whirl, which was designed and built by Sellner Manufacturing in Faribault, Minnesota. This photo actually shows the tilt-a-whirl being set up for a trial run in a field in Faribault, right near the Sellner Manufacturing plant. It was then dismantled, brought up to Wildwood, and tested at the park before making its debut the following year at the Minnesota State Fair. Today, the Sellner is actually still making tilt-a-whirls. The company's been purchased by another company, but they are making the rides still here in Minnesota. The Philadelphia Toboggan Company owned the carousel at Wildwood. The ride had brightly colored horses, lions, and giraffes in addition to seats. The Postal Photo Gallery, which meant that no outside commercial photographers were allowed on the grounds, was a popular place to stop. The photo gallery took photographs and printed 3 postal cards for 25 cents, all while you waited. Tommy Nash, a Japanese American, owned the games of chance on the grounds, and many of the prizes were imported from Japan. Muriel Bond ran the games 5 cents or 10 cents per play. According to an oral history interview with her, it was not unusual to take in $1,000 a day in coins in the 1920s. Men working the games would throw coins in baskets, and Muriel would have to roll them all. Receipts were turned over to the streetcar office, and they kept 25%. Payroll for the park was also paid out of the streetcar office. Ice houses were located on site to provide ice for cooling ice cream. Ice was harvested directly from the lake in the winter and packed with sawdust to insulate it so it would last into the summer months. Additional ice was also hauled by the Cluett family from White Bear Lake. The original bowling alley was up near the more functional aspects of the park as you make your way into the Matamidi section, or around the curve toward Matamidi. The period after World War I was really the beginning of the end. Costs were increasing, but fares were restricted. The Minnesota Railroad and Warehouse Commission had control over the fares and how they could be set by the streetcar company, or for the streetcar company. And in December 1925, fares were set at 8 cents cash or 40 cents for 6 tokens. The TCRT also purchased the cab company and 2 major competitors in the bus company by 1928. They were setting themselves up with a transportation monopoly. In 1932, the TCRT began the procedure to abandon the trackage on the west side of White Bear Lake, and the last run happened in September of that year. The Stillwater line was also abandoned. Wildwood Amusement Park encompassed 20 acres and 2,000 feet of shoreline. During its heyday in the early 20th century, thousands of people visited the popular resort. Employees lived on site in dormitories, and those who chose to lived off-site and received free rides to and from work on the streetcar. The majority of Wildwood Amusement Park began to close in 1932. The new bathhouse burned to the ground in February of 1936. The White Bear and Matamidi fire departments laid 1,600 feet of hose to the nearest hydrant to discover it was dead. The lake was barricaded by snow and the ice too thick, so all they could do was watch the building burn. The dance pavilion and a few attractions remained open until 1938, when the park was dismantled and the buildings were razed. The land was sold and subdivided for development. The infamous Pippin roller coaster was dismantled and taken to Excelsior Amusement Park, where it was enjoyed for many years. When Excelsior closed, the Pippin also met its end. Many believe the coaster was transported to Valley Fair in Shakopee, but that is not the case. The coaster at Valley Fair was constructed new in 1976. Other portions of the park were actually sold off. Functional pieces like staircases and decking were reused in homes around the lake, so pieces do survive, but very little is physically left of what was Wildwood Amusement Park. When it closed, it was definitely the end of an era.
Programming for the White Bear Lake Area Historical Society is made possible through the generous donations from our patrons and visitors. Your tax-deductible gift goes directly towards future programming, community outreach, and education. Monetary donations can easily be made online at whitebearhistory.org. Please help us to continue to save history, and thank you so much for your support.